this is a different game. The premise here is that when we shift from industries to ecosystems, lots of things change. It's not just that competition is more intense, is it's coming from different directions with different intent. These leaders were trained 30 years ago. I don't think Japan can afford to say, we don't do this.
はい、皆さんこんにちは。クロスディグの竹下隆一郎です。クロスディグ101始まります。今日はですね、ちょっと英語のインタビューにチャレンジします。ゲストでお迎えするのはロン・アドナー教授という、アメリカのタックビジネススクールの、著名なビジネススクールの教授なんですが、彼はですね、日本語でも本が出ているんですが、ワイドレンズとかエコシステムディスラプションという本が出ていて、面白い主張をしてるんですね。これ見てる方にきっと役に立つと思うんですが、一つは、彼が言ってるのは、狭い視野は良くないと。自社のビジネスに集中するあまり外が見えなくなってしまうこの罠について語ってるんですよね。例えば自動車産業だったら突然テスラとか中国の自動車をやってきたりとか、そういった見えない敵をどう察知するのかという話。そして2つ目はこれ結構日本企業に向いてると思うんですが、イノベーションとか、創造っていうのは壊すだけじゃなくて適切なパートナーと仲良くしておくことも大事だって、そんなことを話してるんですね。では早速、ロン・アドナー教授をお呼びしたいと思います。So, Professor Ron Adler, welcome to our show.
It's great to be here.
So, you are a Tuck Business School professor and one of the world's most innovative and creative experts on technology and strategy.
You're being kind. Thank you.
And you work closely with NTT Data Institute of Management Consulting, so you know a lot about Japan.
Something about Japan.
So, how's your stay in Japan so far?
Spectacular. This is my first visit, and it's just every interaction is a great surprise.
What's your impression of Japanese business professionals or Japanese companies overall?
I think overall, what comes across really clearly is a lot of dedication and a lot of care, and also a real desire to get things right, where the backside of that is a concern about not getting things right. Right, and so we need to make sure everything is right before it ships, whether it's in a conversation, whether it's in a slide deck, whether it's in a product, and it helps explain a little bit why there's a sense of risk aversion. Right, we can perfect, but jumping into an uncertain environment with an uncertain outcome feels almost irresponsible.
Yes.
That concern about, well, what if it doesn't work out exactly right, becomes somewhat paralytic.
Right.
And I think that's something that would be productive to overcome.
Right. I'll ask more about Japanese business later in our conversation, but to begin with, I read your books, Wide Lens and Winning the Right Game. What shocked me is that it seemed to me that we live in a world where some our rivals or our competitors pop up suddenly in a day. For example, like Toyota has to compete with Tesla or maybe Apple car in the future. So to me, it seems like our competitors are existing outside of our industry or outside of our box. So could you elaborate on that? Yeah.
Well, so you're exactly right, right? Which is the core observation is that for quite a long time, we could think of the world in terms of industries, clean industries. We knew what was going on. There was a car industry. And different companies in the car industry could do different things in different ways. GM manages their labor in a different way than Toyota. They manage their suppliers in a different way than Toyota. But at the end of the day, they both build cars. They both make money from selling cars. It was clear.
Very simple.
Yeah. And if you think about autonomy, suddenly, well, it needs a car. Self-driving cars need cars, but there are all these questions about, well, who's going to be the brains of the electric car? Right? Look, one day Google wakes up and says, we do search. We make money with advertising. People are spending time in their cars. We could show them advertising. So we should do self-driving cars. And if I'm GM or Toyota, I no longer know which way is up.
Right.
Because, by the way, Google is doing this to make money, not by selling cars. It's not just that competition is more intense, it's coming from different directions with different intent.
So what's the key to winning the right game?
So I would say the key to winning the right game is first understanding your game. Right? This idea of what's your value architecture.
Interesting. So in order to understand your philosophy and theory better, I'd like to go over some case studies.
Yep.
So first, we want to talk about Tesla, especially the competition with Toyota and automobile and also automatic driving. And second case study, we like to talk about Spotify because they compete with Apple. And you're mentioning in your book that partnership is the key.
Yes.
Strategy to them winning. And finally, I'd like to ask you to give advice for Japanese business leaders. So let's start with Tesla. And in your book, you talk about the right timing when you talk about Tesla. What's timing in business strategy?
Great question. The premise here is that when we shift from industries to ecosystems, lots of things change, including how we think about timing, right? So traditionally, when we think about competition, we think about who's going to be better first, right? Or if I have a new rival coming into the market, at what point will they become better than me? If I'm the rival, I look at the old technology. I was like, I just need to be better than them, and now I take the price. When we think about ecosystems, which is when we think about efforts where the value proposition that you're creating, the promise that you're making to the customer depends not just on your product, but on other things. Okay, you have an electric car. Well, besides the car, you need charging infrastructure. Because if it's not ready, it doesn't matter that you have the car.
I see.
Right? And so in the Tesla story, right? So if we look at the next slide, the idea is that when the new value proposition requires additional components to be ready, then the moment of superiority is delayed. You need to wait for the whole thing to be ready. And if we look at the picture, what we see is that crossover point B, first of all, it's later, it's further on the right, but also it's higher up.
Interesting.
Because the existing technology has a chance to improve over that time period. So the hurdle is higher, right? And if you think about, electric car strategy through that lens, this is the big advantage that Tesla has granted itself by taking control of the charging infrastructure and making it ready for Tesla, whereas the rest of the world is still, certainly in the US, waiting for consistent charging infrastructure to take place.
So you're saying that companies tend to focus on the technology. For instance, if you want to build an electrical vehicle, they tend to focus on technology, but in addition, you need infrastructure or regulations or changing people's mindset or these
Exactly.
things.
In the transition from internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles is so shocking, not because it never happened before. 130 years ago, people needed to figure out the automotive industry for the first time. Oh, you're going to make a car. Who's going to make the fuel? What's going to happen if it breaks down? So over time, those questions become answered with an understanding of, oh, you're the car manufacturing industry. Oh, you're the service industry. Oh, you're the gas station industry. Oh, you're the insurance industry. And for 100 years, car makers' job was just put out better cars and they fit seamlessly into the rest of this infrastructure. What makes electric cars and autonomous cars ecosystem innovations is they require adjustments to that infrastructure. And a lot of companies kind of recognize that as a reality, but they don't have the strategy muscles and the frameworks and the grammar to be able to then translate that into, well, how do we want to think about making our investments, and our partnerships, and our activities?
But how can companies figure out the right timing? It's so complicated.
The world is becoming more complicated, and because of that, it becomes more important to spend more time thinking through strategy. Because there are answers to how do you think about timing, right? So you need to be very clear about what are the aspects, what are the elements that will create this kind of delay that we see on this slide. And at the same time, if we move to the next picture, we need to be cognizant of what's happening with the old technology. Right? So one of the challenges for electric cars today is that the energy efficiency of combustion engine cars has improved dramatically in the last 10 years. And so again, we see a moving target. right? So here we see point C is again later and again at a higher level
So it's
of
moving,
performance.
yes, higher and higher.
That you need, if you're the black line, that you need to cross over in order to win, right? And if we have both of those aspects, which we have in so many cases, where there's delays in establishing the ecosystem for the new technology and opportunities for the old technology to improve, and that would be the last picture, you see this point D creates such a higher barrier for superiority for the new value proposition that somebody who was planning their entry that says, oh, I just need to beat A and then I start making money. I just need to beat A and then I'm strong in the market, will be crushed by the reality that nothing happens until D, right? And this is what it means to think about timing strategy. It's understanding the factors that determine your ability to create value, to get superiority, and then prepare your company for the real timing rather than, you know, the hoped for timing, which is A.
So how can we figure out, what kind of research do we need to figure out the right timing?
We need to first understand the map of the ecosystem that we need to create our value. We need to understand who are the actors, where do they sit, and then we can ask, well, how will they get to that seat? When will they get to that seat? And then we aggregate those insights to have a better hypothesis on what timing would look like. And by the way, the longer the timing, the other thing you have to consider is there's always the possibility of new things happening while we wait. Right? I mean, look, Nissan made the world's first mass market electric vehicle, the Nissan Leaf. And then the Prius came about.
Yes.
The Prius, the hybrid electric internal combustion engine, was a terrible setback to the pure electric car because, again, it moves the point of superiority further and further back. And now your Nissan, you thought you had a good idea, and the return on that investment collapses, not just because you didn't think through the charging infrastructure the way you should have, the way we discussed, but because of while you were waiting, this new thing happened and the horizon got reset.
Since you mentioned Prius and Nissan, so Nissan is trying to merge with Honda and Toyota having difficulty with competition with Tesla and also Chinese electric vehicles. So do you think that Japanese automobile companies were looking at a very narrow lens? Do you think they should have paid attention to a more wider lens?
Well, I want to be careful. I want to be very respectful.
Okay, we're in Japan, right?
We are. No, in general, I think it's essential when we think about companies and the leaders of these companies trying to navigate these complicated waters. Life is more complicated today than 20 years ago.
Of course.
And by the way, all these leaders were trained 30 years ago. Right. So, you know, the tools of strategy available to them were built to dominate industries. And those tools, as we're saying, are not appropriate for ecosystems. So your question was, what can Japanese companies do and adjust? And I think one of the really interesting things is that, you know, you need to remember, Japanese companies taught the world how to produce in an industry in a way nobody knew before. The whole lean production system was this revolution. And if you look at it through the wrong lens, you would look at something like the car industry and say, wow, there are a lot of different partners working together here. And since we know how to organize a very, very complicated supply chain, we know what to do with ecosystems. But the big difference between the supply chains that, you know, Japanese companies are masters of and ecosystems is the difference between relationships where everybody knows where they sit. You are my tier 2 supplier, he is my tier 1 supplier, and I am the buyer. We're negotiating bilateral transactions. You know, the big surprise with supply chain management was that instead of just beating each other up on price, we can share information and become more efficient. But, you know, the brake pad went to the brake manufacturer and the brake went to the car manufacturer. Everybody knew their order. In these ecosystem environments, that order is being created in real time. if you're a car maker, are you supposed to have a charging infrastructure? Are you supposed to have a partner that does a charging infrastructure? If you invest in that partner, are they supposed to open that infrastructure to your competitors who didn't make the investment? It's a different set of debates and discussions. And this goes back to the need for perfection. If you feel a need to get everything locked down before you move, it's very hard to move in environments that are fluid.
Especially these days, yes.
Yes.
Do you think Japanese companies or business leaders can change and obtain another wider lens? Because it's not about age, but Japanese leaders were trained like decades ago, as opposed to a tech company in Silicon Valley. Maybe some Gen Z entrepreneur will make us like a new card someday. Do you think it's not about we can like obtain a wider lens even we're trained decades before?
Yes. Absolutely. There is so much talent and there is so much creativity and so much persistence in Japan that the notion of saying of counting out these companies, I think, is just it's an easy thing to say, but it is both unproductive and irresponsible. Because by the way, I don't think Japan can afford to say we don't do this.
No.
Because now
we need to change right
we're
now.
Just you're just going to be a component maker, which Japan doesn't deserve to be. Right? I think that's like being again, this is my first visit, but seeing there's so much creativity here that the notion that it's only kind of the California folks that can do this, I think that's not right. And that's why you'll see in the books there example like the alloy example, right? No, so there's a wonderful case study about 150-year-old Nordic manufacturer of locks and keys, owned by private equity, that transforms itself from making keys to controlling government ideas on the phone, right? Kind of making realizing that credentialing and identity are the real business they're in, and transforming. If they can do it, other companies can do it. That doesn't mean that it's easy, right? You need to have a willingness to invest. You need to have good luck, but there's no need to take yourself out of the game completely and say I give up before I even start. But what is essential is recognizing that this is a different game, right? That just more of the same is not going to solve this problem. A better and better car will not solve the charging infrastructure problem.
That's right. It's a totally new game.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Spotify, because it's interesting that you mentioned Spotify. There was a case, Spotify versus Apple, but Spotify actually won. So how did they win?
Yeah. So so usually we talk about these stories of ecosystems and disruptors. We talk about the big attackers.
Yeah, big attack. Yeah.
Right. Here comes Amazon. They're going to eat your lunch. Here comes Tesla.
Google. Yeah.
And the really interesting thing about Spotify is Spotify is the first company to really figure out a commercial model for music streaming. And it turns out that model is really interesting, but also easy to copy.
Yes.
Right? So Spotify, exciting Swedish startup, takes 4 to 6 years to finally get their act together. And the day after they get their act together and show the world what they're doing, Apple shows up with Apple Music streaming. The exact same song catalog, except it's Apple. Spotify doesn't have 20 yen to get on the subway, and Apple is the most powerful, richest company in the world, this giant installed base of users, and they launch Apple Music. And so the mystery is, how is it possible that Spotify is not bankrupt?
Yes.
Right? Forget not bankrupt. How is it that they have more users than Apple Music?
No.
And the secret to that story, and there's the two halves to the story, right? Yeah. There's the build-up and then how they almost implode.
Implode, yeah.
But the starting point is the recognition that the key to Spotify's success is the music companies, and that the music companies have an enormous interest in making sure that Apple is not the only successful company in the market, right? So if we go before music streaming, and you remember the age of MP3s and MP3 players, and Apple had the iTunes store
Yes.
and became basically the dominant seller of digital music, they had an iron glove on the neck of the music companies, right? The music companies had agreed to selling songs for 99 cents a song. And after they agreed to this, they realized that this was the worst decision they ever made, right?
Right.
Before, the entire model of the industry was you have a hit song that people want to listen to, and you bundle it with 10 songs that maybe they're not interested in.
The full album.
And you sell that as an album
Yes.
for $11.
And the artist gets paid.
And the artist gets
And they
paid.
earn a living and
And everything
make another
works.
song,
And the decision to unbundle the songs, which remember, this was, we had Napster before that created piracy. That was lost. But people were still buying albums. Grown-ups were buying albums. The day the music industry agreed to the 99 cents a song model, basically what they said is anybody who was willing to pay $11 for the album, now you can pay $1 for the hit song.
Yes.
So they did this to themselves. And when they realized what a mistake this was, they asked Apple, hey, can we go back to something like
To the album?
$4 for a good song and $1 for not? And Apple basically said, if you ever say this again, I'm going to tell everybody that you're greedy, that you don't respect them, and they should just go to pirating. Because remember, the iPod played pirated songs just as well as legal songs.
Yes.
So this is the prehistory. And so when the music industry sees the possibility of streaming, Spotify essentially is the alternative to Apple. It doesn't matter that it's Spotify. They just need somebody else as a shield against the squeeze that Apple would otherwise put on them. So the most important thing in Spotify's early history is lining up these music companies as partners. Then, we go through the journey of how they improve their service and kind of they move from being just a massive catalog to having better and better searching of that catalog, and then moving from searching to helping with music recommendations and kind of enhancing the value proposition. And then, right before the IPO, as Spotify is looking for additional growth, they have this great idea, which is, if all music is digital, why do artists need to give so much of their revenue to these music publishers who are no longer publishing music, right? They're it's all streaming. And so Spotify goes to the market and says, you know what, a big source of our future revenue is going to be artist direct coming to us. What a great idea,
Yeah.
right? Get rid of the intermediaries,
No
more
middleman.
efficient, no middleman. And of course you hear the mismatch, right?
Right.
The middleman was your protection,
Right.
right?
There
The
were-
the middleman likes being in the middle.
Yes.
And what happened, literally, in the morning, Spotify makes this announcement, and by the end of the day, the major music labels make the announcement that, you know what, we were going to give Spotify rights to stream in India. We're not going to do that anymore. And Spotify very quickly beats a retreat. It says, you know what, that was a mistake. We never meant it.
Yeah.
We need to keep you publishers on board. We will be respectful. We could create that value for the artists, but we're not going to, right? Which many artists, by the way, felt was a betrayal.
Yeah.
But absent that, Spotify would not be viable. And so this, again, leads us to an understanding of, as we're thinking about strategy and ecosystems, right, we're balancing multiple partners and multiple interests. And so the principle of ecosystem defense, right, which is what Spotify is playing against Apple,
Sure.
requires maintaining your coalition intact, right? Which means sometimes sacrificing growth that you were hoping for yourself for the sake of keeping the system together.
It's interesting because when we talk about innovation, it's about disrupting something, but you're mentioning that sometimes it's important to create partnerships with certain partners. So how can we figure out who's the right partner? Because if we make a mistake, we might create an innovation with a different wrong partner, and that will slow down the innovation. So how can you figure out who's the right partner?
So that's such a foundational question, right? Because who is the right partner can change over time for multiple reasons, right? It could be that conditions change and what that partner is offering becomes less special, more commoditized. It could be that partner changes, like they feel pressures or they feel temptations, right? So the challenge of partnership is if you're adjacent to one another, it's very natural for me to see how you're making money. It's a very natural way for me to grow. And this is, again, this kind of in the Spotify story is like, this is what's required for discipline. The counter side to that is, as you're picking partners, you want to project forward. You want to think about, possible worlds where, well, what happens if they get very hungry? What's the first plate that they're going to go to? And if it's mine, it tells me something about how we might want to work together.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we can't work together, but it says I need to be careful about that commitment. Right? There are other partners that I can see early on. If we keep working together and they just get better and better at what they're doing, that's going to be amazing. That's an easy partner.
Yeah.
Right? There are other partners that we can see the path they're pursuing over time will matter less and less. It doesn't make them bad, but it means that they become less critical. They become kind of more of a commodity supplier in value creation. Right? And then there are other partners that you can look forward and say, wow, if they keep getting better in this way, it's going to be bad news for me. Right? So in the world of strategy, right, we used to think about disruption, kind of the, Clay Christensen, who was a dear friend, who wrote this amazing book called The Innovator's Dilemma. And he was thinking of disruption as substitutes that emerge, and then they're easy to miss because they're inferior, but then they get good enough, and then they start grabbing bits of your market share. We're talking about a different kind of disruption, right? We're talking about disruption from complements, disruption from partners, where the issue is not that they're getting good enough. This is a partner who is now getting too good at what they're doing, and they start making what I'm doing irrelevant, right? So these are the trajectories of partnership that you want to assess collaboration on, and on the basis of that, figure out not what the commitments you want to make are, but the commitments and the duration with which you're thinking about those commitments. Which again, I think Japanese companies historically have been very, very long-lived relationships.
Yes, I think that's what we are good at.
Right, and this is a nuance to that. That some things are long-term and others will not, and it's okay. A classic disruption, again, the boxes stayed where they were. It was one car maker disrupting another, but the industry stayed the industry. Here, the definition of the industry is changing, and that's why we need a different toolkit, a different playbook.
Great. So I think we need to wrap up. So from the Tesla case and the Spotify case, so what can our viewers learn from? What can Japanese business leaders learn from your insights in your book? Yeah.
So I think the number one message is to start with a view of your holistic value creation and who is involved in it. Like, take a careful look as you're launching new efforts to see who are the new actors or existing actors who need to be in new positions in order to enable that value proposition. And then from there, the question becomes, well, how do we get them into those seats? And how might they shift from that seat into a different one? Right? And this is the core of ecosystem strategy. It's how do I think about alignment and reconfiguration before I get caught up in issues of control and power and value capture.
Is it a matter of changing your mindset?
Yeah, it's 100%. It's the difference. So can I talk about the difference between an execution mindset and an alignment mindset?
What's the difference?
Right, and so an execution mindset is one where you put your company first. That's a wonderful quality in a CEO, and you secure the win that you need. An alignment mindset, and that works well in an industry where everything is in place.
So it's like the same industry, same game.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where you're competing and you're making the better car.
Very simple game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An alignment mindset is what's required to build a new ecosystem. And there, the priority cannot be your company first. Because if you always say my company first, no partner will want to work with you. So the mindset shift is it's got to be the coalition first, and my company will do well later.
That's an interesting point because people tend to think company first, but you're saying that that's not the way it's going to happen in this world, right?
Yeah. So company first again. Jim Collins, another
everyone says company
wonderful,
first.
Wonderful thinker, is a good friend. The idea of a level 5 leader was not just a brilliant leader, but a leader who puts his organization first. And that works really well until you need other organizations to collaborate. And then it's not my organization last, it's not my organization loses, but it can't be first. I need to craft a way where the coalition wins and then I win next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Adler, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you so much.
What a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
はい、インタビューいかがだったでしょうか。これからもですね、このクロスディグ101では日本ではなかなか聞けない海外のゲストをどんどん呼んで英語でどんどんインタビューしていきますので、チャンネル登録の方よろしくお願いします。